We'll now bring our budget hearing to a beginning. We'll now bring our budget hearing to a beginning today. One of the things, the reason why we're having this meeting is to discuss our city's past, present, and future from a fiscal management and stewardship foundation. Many times when we're running for office, it is expected that we use terms like fiscal responsibility and conservative budgeting because that's what people think they want to hear. However, it's funny, though, because when you get elected, all anybody wants to talk about is making sure their program is not only fully funded, but growing. And truth be told, that's the reason that most of all of us get into public service in the first place. That's to help our community and our neighbors thrive. I'm positive that I could generate 150 great ideas for the city in the next couple of hours just by asking my fellow city board of directors for their thoughts. I'm talking about serious ideas that would improve life in Little Rock for all of us. And from that being said, there's just one problem. Current funding doesn't cover the things that are already in the budget today. City revenues have been declining for years, and despite some good months recently, we are not seeing signs of improving. And so we have to figure out a plan for not necessarily our short-term future, but our long-term future. The expected increase in sales tax revenue from internet sales tax will provide some relief, but not enough to reverse a trend in making a decision for our long-term future. In the face of these challenges, we've relied on one-time monies to really prop up some areas of the budget, which we are grateful that we had the opportunity to do so. This is not a sustainable solution when we're thinking about our long-term future, and it's time for us to address this problem head on. To put the city on a sound and responsible footing. There will be some issues involved in this. There will be most likely some cuts to programs that do good work and help people. I don't like that. I'm sure you don't like that either. But neither does anyone else in the room. But the truth is that it is our job to do what's right for our community and our neighbors. And right now that job is to make some tough choices to make certain that we have fiscal stewardship for the long run. I do want to take time to thank all of our department directors who have been doing their best over the last year to rein in cost, and they've done that already. And so we want to applaud their work. We want to applaud our Chief Financial Officer and Sarah for what she's done, and also our Mr. Manager, Bruce Moore. And so this is the reason why, because we have to continue to address issues, and that's the reason why I've called this budget hearing, or budget exercise, rather. But also, I want to make certain everyone understands the great work that our city manager and our fellow department directors have done to manage this process. And what I wanted to do is make certain that the board was involved in how we look at our past, our present, and our future for a forthcoming budget amendment that the board will have to consider. And make a decision on. And instead of waiting to a few months from now to make those type of decisions, I wanted us to start thinking about that process early on. With that being said, I'm going to ask Ms. Sarah Linehan to please give us an overview of our past, present, and future for this budget discussion. I do want to stress the importance of allowing Ms. Linehan to complete the PowerPoint presentation, and that we reserve all questions for after she completes the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the board, Mr. Moore. As the mayor said, the approach I took is really to look at 2018, the year that's just finished, that is currently under audit, where we believe we will end up once that process is complete, what is included in our 2019 budget, and then some challenges we face moving forward to 2020. So if we'll go to the first slide here, you all will recall that our original adopted budget, did Mr. Richardson get a handout? I got. All right. Our original adopted 2018, and I'm talking primarily today about the general fund budget. When we adopt the budget includes an adopted budget for the general fund, the street fund, waste disposal fund, the parking garage fund, fleet fund, and vehicle storage. The issues that we're talking about today are those that are in the general fund primarily, and so that will be the focus. The original adopted 2018 general fund budget included revenue and expenditures of $208.9 million. You remember that during the year we were faced with some challenges that required adjustment. Our sales and use tax results were not what we had anticipated. One of the most unforeseen things was the Tax Cut and Jobs Act at the federal level that significantly reduced our franchise fee revenues. As we had discussed, rate increases had already been approved for Energy and CenterPoint when this Tax Cut and Jobs Act passed. And the direction that the governor gave the utilities was to go back to the Public Service Commission and have that reviewed. They received several tax credits, federal tax credits associated with that act, which then offset the need for cost recovery. So projections that they had given us that we had included in revenues had to be reversed, and that was part of that amendment. And that took place during the year, and then credits have been given to customers, and those are continuing into the current year for the most part. In addition, we had a lot of weather events that negatively impacted the parks and the zoo venues. So we brought forward a budget amendment in August that reduced our revenue projections by $3.8 million. In addition, in that same budget amendment, we had increases to expenditures. They were primarily associated with public safety. They added $2.8 million to the budget. One of the larger ones was the police sick leave incentive program, which cost about $1.75 million in 2018. That was the first year of the program, so there were many officers that qualified for that first year. The anticipated impact to 2019 is much less at $300,000. In addition, we made an adjustment to increase fire overtime expenses by $650,000, and all of the other adjustments that were included in the budget amendment totaled about $453,000. Those primarily were associated with additional vacation and sick payout accruals, reduced vacancy savings as we were moving to full employment in the police department, and then case management software for the city attorney's office. To help offset some of those expenditures in the budget amendment, and I guess the combination of both the reduced revenues and the increased expenses was a negative impact to the budget, or a gap. It left a gap of $6.6 million. So in order to partially offset that, we used the contingency allocation that we set aside each year, which is $1 million. We transferred $1 million of fleet fund balance into the general fund, and we closed some special projects that we had set aside in previous years, and that was about $1.7 million. And the combination of those three things was $3.7 million, which left us with a $2.9 million gap in our budget, in our amended budget. So our projected loss with that budget amendment for the year, if everything had come in on budget from the amended budget, would be that the general fund would lose $2,930,910 for 2018. As we were wrapping up the year and completed our search for unrecorded liabilities, as we pay expenses in the first quarter of the year in particular, we're still receiving bills that relate to November and December of the previous year. We pull anything back that relates to the previous year. That first payroll in January is for time worked in December. That gets pulled back. Once we make all those year-end adjustments, we see that the general fund loss is actually going to be about $4,136,000. That is still a preliminary number. We're reviewing accounts. We're under audit right now. It could change slightly. I don't expect it to change a lot. So this is $1,200,000 more than what we anticipated in the amended budget. The three areas where the two largest variances occurred in police and fire. The fire variance was about $964,000, which about $739,000 of that was overtime and alt-rate expenses. They also had about $401,000 in repairs to a major fire truck. It was a major repair to a fire truck towards the end of the year that they had not anticipated. And then they had some favorable variances that helped to offset that to bring that down to $964,000. Police were over budget by $504,000. About $190,000 of that was personnel related, with other overages in the areas of like rent, wireless communications, and then some other things. All of our other departments net together are going to have a net favorable variance of $263,000. Some are slightly over, some are slightly under, but the combination of all the other departments is a favorable variance of $263,000. So now I want to talk a little bit about those numbers that I just gave you are general fund standalone by itself, as they are reported to you in the monthly financial reports we distribute and in our quarterly financial report. But when it comes to the audit, the general fund is not presented by itself. It is combined with the general fund special projects and the seized money fund. And I'm going to explain to you why that's the case. So the general fund contains the annual operating expenditures of the city departments that are funded primarily by taxes, licenses, fines, and fees that do not directly correspond to the services received or that are heavily subsidized by tax revenues. So you may never need a police officer personally or a fireman personally. Those services are provided by tax revenues. Even when you go to the zoo or many of our parks venues, if you pay at all, the price you pay does not cover the cost of that operation. It's heavily subsidized by tax revenues. So those are general fund activities. Those are just examples, as are finance, human resources, city attorney's office, things like that. General fund special projects are funds that are set aside from general fund revenue to track special initiatives of the city and of the board of directors. So examples include children, youth, and family projects, weed lot maintenance, homelessness outreach, annual fleet replacement, and a host of other things. You see that list when we adopt our budget each year. On the next slide, you'll see that for audit and bond rating purposes in the comprehensive annual financial report, those funds are combined, as I mentioned. They're shown separately in the monthly financial reports, but the reason they're combined is because they are internally controlled by the mayor and the city board of directors. There is no other legal restriction on those revenues that is external to the city. So I'm going to try to explain this in sort of a simplified manner. Scott, if you'll go to the next slide. When the general fund provides an allocation to special projects, we include that in transfers out. So it is budgeted. But transferring funds from the general fund to the special projects fund is much like moving money from your checking account to your savings account. If you think of that as one family, these two funds as one family, moving money from the general fund to special projects, transfers, but the family's no better off. You've got the same amount of money. You just moved it to a different account. The same is true when you close a special project and you transfer that money from the special project fund back into the general fund. Your checking account or general fund may look better because you moved money back into it from special projects. But that money came out of the special project fund. When you combine them together, you have no more money than you did to start with, okay? So a transfer earmarks funds for special purposes, but it doesn't change the total amount of funds available, okay? Everybody understand that concept? So on the next slide, I'm showing you, this is how the funds look when they're combined. So I've summarized revenues and expenditures, and then in the center there, beginning line 5, 6, and 7, those are transfers that occur between the general fund and general fund special projects. And you can see that when they're combined, there is no net impact at all to the total general fund presentation. Now, there are other transfers in and out that are related to other funds. So the regular annual overhead contributions that we receive from like the street fund and from waste disposal, and those are for things like HR, finance, city attorney services, all those things that they don't have in those funds, but we run their payroll, we pay all the bills, city attorney's office manages all the contracts. So that's an overhead allocation. There is a transfer in from the 3/8 cent debt service. That 3/8 cent fund, we issued several short-term financing notes to advance those projects. The principal portion of the debt service on those notes as it comes due is then funded by 3/8 cent proceeds. And so that's transferred into the general fund. It directly offsets the related debt service. Then there were some one-time allocations from fleet and other projects. So these were transfers in to the general fund that we made during the budget amendment and other things that are not recurring. They happened one time from fund balance, or they might happen a couple of times, but they're not a sustainable ongoing source of revenue. So the end result, again, as I've told you, is that in the general fund column, we're estimating a net loss of $4,136,000. When you look at the general fund special projects and you look at line 6, that transfers out from general fund to special projects. The main revenue in special projects fund comes from those general fund transfers. Then you look up on line 3 and you see the $10,720,000 net expenditures from the fund. Now that $1.8 million that's on the first line of special projects, that was some revenue that came from a combination of things, some donations. There was over $1 million that was associated with the 1 cent hotel lodging tax before the bonds were issued. And that's what that revenue is representing. So that net was covered by the transfer from the general fund. But then when we closed prior year special projects and did the carryover transfer to the general fund, that's what that $2.9 million is that went from the special projects back to the general fund. That's what's creating the net loss in the special projects fund of $2,949,000. If we had not made that transfer, the general fund standing alone by itself would have had a $7 million loss. And in combination, that's what we have, a $7 million loss. So in the audited financial statements, we're anticipating a loss of approximately $7 million for the general fund combined. So the impact of that is that it reduces our fund balance from $40,594,000 to $33,588,000, and that's what's circled in red. Included in that $33,588,000 is the $10 million restricted reserve. So on the next slide, similar to the loss or the decline in fund balance, we also will have a decline in our cash in the combined general fund. Now, this is not the exact same amount as the net loss because there's a timing difference in your receivables. We have revenue that's collected, earned in a current month, received in a future month. We have things like payroll that's due that gets paid in a future month. And then we also, most of our grants in our grant fund are reimbursement type grants, so we spend the money first and then we get reimbursed. So the general fund advances cash for those expenditures until we get reimbursed. So some of this $11 million decrease in cash will come back to the general fund. And the net change in cash, once that receivable and payable difference in those advances is covered, gets closer to that $7 million. It's in the $7.9 million decrease. So to summarize our 2018 anticipated results on the next slide, Scott, the general fund itself experienced a net loss of approximately $4.1 million. And again, these numbers could change slightly. When combined with the general fund family that includes the general fund special projects and the seized money fund, we're anticipating a net loss of $7 million. The loss in the general fund special projects fund was primarily due to those transfers or closing unspent prior year allocations. And even though that money was set aside in prior years, when all this gets combined together, it's part of the fund balance. Once the year rolls forward, it's part of fund balance. So to the bond raters, the auditors, that looks like use of fund balance, and it is. Fund balance is like your savings or your carryover, what you have left over at the end of the year. So the message here is that, we had a series of unfortunate events, some of which we couldn't control, created by the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Our sales tax growth became stagnant. We had some increased public safety expenditures and things. But we can't support the ongoing expenses with non-recurring revenues. We need to kind of right-size our budget to adjust so that our recurring expenses and our recurring revenues match up. So now I just want to show you a little bit of what we're anticipating in 2019. So again, in 2019, we adopted a balanced budget for the general fund of $210,623,272. That was the grand total revenues when you add revenues plus transfers in, and it was the grand total expenses when you take your expenses plus transfers out. The budget, though, did include, again, some transfers in from special projects, from closing prior year special projects. The projects that we're anticipating, or the amount we're anticipating to be transferred in from the Special Projects Fund, is $2.5 million. So while the general fund is balanced, when we look at the combination of the two for audit purposes, we're really anticipating a $2.2 million loss for next year, or for the year we're currently in as well, for 2019. So on the next page, that $2.5 million I just talked about on line 1, that's the transfers from special projects. But there are some other non-recurring items in our 2019 budget. Once again, we did transfer fleet fund balance, $950,000, which includes a special project too from another fund. So a total of $950,000. So what I would say is non-recurring revenue that's in the budget is in the neighborhood of that $3.5 million. We also had some temporary expenditure reductions. These are expenditure reductions that are not ongoing. For example, Art Center is under construction with the bond issue. We only allocated $350,000 for the Art Center in our adopted budget, and we did not use general funds for that. We used previously accumulated 1-cent lodging tax revenue. Okay? Well, that's no longer available to us because that's committed now that we've issued the bonds. That will repay the bonds. So not only really the change to the general fund would be $700,000 in the future, because our contract with the Art Center requires a minimum of $700,000. So that will have to be added back to the budget in the future. In addition, in the 2019 budget, we reduced our fleet replacement allocation. Normally that's $800,000. We instead of using $800,000 in the current year, we only did $300,000, and we took $500,000 from accumulated interest earnings in the 3/8 cent fund. Well, that accumulated over a period of multiple years, so that will not be available to us next year. And then Rock Region Metro, when they were communicating what their needs were from the various entities, they used some fund balance to balance their budget, which is not sustainable. So next year that will be included in what would have to be allocated by the city. This is the city's share of that. So my estimation is that the non-recurring items that are included in our budget, when you combine expenses that we reduced in 2019 plus revenues that don't recur, is in the neighborhood of $4.9 million to $5 million. In addition, we allocated $1 million of our Rock Region Metro funding to the street fund. This is a totally allowable use of street fund revenues. If we wanted to, we could allocate the whole $10 million. We just wouldn't have any money left to manage the streets. So the issue here is we can do that. That is a recurring possible thing to do. But the street fund would have to make adjustments in order to accommodate that moving forward. They've used some funds each year to replace some of their street equipment that our fleet fund we haven't had to pay for with other resources. So there would need to be some adjustments made in the street fund if that were to continue. On the next slide, you can see that when you look from 2013 to 2019, I averaged the salary increases that have taken place for police and fire. The general fund and AFSCME have not always kept pace exactly with street and fire or police and fire, but they're the vast majority of the payroll in the general fund. That's averaged 2.5% each year for police and fire, and that excludes their step and grade progression. In other words, their step and grade progression is on top of that. But when you look at our sales tax growth, you can see that in 2013, less than 1%. 2014, 1.3%. We had a great year in 2015 with 3.56%, and then it was negative in 2016. When you look at the average, including the 1% growth we had for 2018, that has grown only 1.36% over the same period of time. Personnel expenses make up 75% of the general fund budget. So there's a disconnect here. Next, during the program inventory meetings and various board actions, there have been items that were identified that we needed to include in a short-term financing note for this year. We currently have an RFQ outstanding for legal counsel for the short-term note. We've already signed a contract agreement for the computer-aided dispatch system that was approved by Resolution 14900 on December 3rd of 2018. So, and it says that it will be funded by a short-term note in 2019. So $2.9 million of that $5 million note would be toward the computer-aided dispatch system. We have $1.6 million in the note that would be phase one of a 3-year plan to replace the end-of-life radios for police and fire. We have the first phase of a 4-year plan to replace or to add an extra set of fire turnout gear to address some health concerns. And then we have some bedroom renovations at Fire Station 12. So this is something that we're planning to do during the current year, and that will add to next year's budget as we make that first short-term financing payment. Now the next slide, a little bit of good news. During the 2019 legislative session, Senate Bill 576 became Act 22, which is the Internet Sales Tax Bill. This bill was signed, it's Act 822. With the act in place, collection of state and local taxes from a remote seller or a marketplace facilitator, so that includes when Amazon is selling on behalf of another small mom and pop. If they exceed a certain number of, a certain dollar amount, I think it's $100,000 in transactions, or a certain volume of sales, then they'll be required to collect and remit sales tax to the state of Arkansas beginning July 1, 2019. On the next slide, we've estimated the impact of that to the city. Now, I want to tell you, this is based on the state's estimate of what this is going to bring in. It's logically calculated, but that doesn't mean it's accurate, okay? So the $1.3 billion on the top line, that is the total local sales tax collected in Arkansas in 2018. That includes county and local taxes. The city's share of the county sales tax and the city's local 1.5 cent tax generated $122,143,000. That's 9.08% of that total, okay? The state has estimated that the tax that will be collected in 2020, beginning with their fiscal year, July 1, 2019, will be $10,800,000. So we're on a January to December year end. So we just said, cut that in half, $5.4 million. Then take our 9.08% of that total, and that estimate is $490,000. Then we reduce that by the 3% administrative charge that they keep, and we're estimating $475,000. Well, not all of our tax goes to the general fund. Part of it goes to the 3/8 cent sales tax fund for special projects. So we're estimating that $356,000 could help us in 2019, and 118 or 119,000 rounded would go to the 3/8 cent fund. The next group of numbers is their projection for 2020, and here we just took the full 12 months, for a full year in 2020. And again, I'm not sure how the state came up with their estimates. I do know that because of the $2,500 rebate threshold, we do not grow at the same rate that the state does. Whether or not these numbers are very conservative or overestimating, I don't know. I mean, we're using the numbers that they provided. But for next year, we would anticipate that might add $780,000 to the general fund budget and $260,000 to the 3/8 cent fund. Now, everything I've talked about to this point was all in place before our new mayor arrived on the scene. So now we've got some new initiatives as well. So on the next slide, you'll see we have some initiatives in the mayor's plan for a safe city. One of the things he's indicated he would like to do is to add 100 police officers over the next 5 years. Well, the estimated cost of 20 officers in 1 year using our current pay schedule would be about $1.6 million. The salary and benefit portion of that is $62,500 per officer. That includes their pension contributions, everything that goes into that. The uniform and training equipment is approximately $15,000, and that includes, ammunition and things for training, that type of stuff. It does not include vehicles, body cameras, or other equipment. The cost of a patrol car is approximately $53,150, and that includes all the upfit with the lights and the computers and all the stuff that goes in the car. So that's one potential expenditure on the horizon. Body-worn cameras. The city has an outstanding RFP for body-worn cameras. The estimated cost depends really on the number of cameras we decide to purchase. We've got options in the proposals on the data storage and the retention requirements. So right now I really don't know what this is going to add till we get those bids in and decide on the number of cameras we're going to start with and the data storage. Since body cameras are an ongoing expense, they're not just a one-time you buy a camera. The maintenance, the data storage, it's an ongoing operating expense. So this is not something we're planning to issue short-term financing for. This is something that would need to be funded in another way or built into the operating budget. We do anticipate applying for a grant that has just recently been announced that would help us initially. On the next slide. So the summary for 2019 is that the adopted general fund budget is balanced, but it uses some non-recurring transfers in and some temporary expenditure reductions that are not sustainable. Our average salary growth has exceeded sales tax growth over the last 6 years. Personnel cost is 75% of the budget. The city anticipates issuing a $5 million short-term note that would add approximately $1 million in expense to 2020 to 2024. Act 822 is an important step in restoring lost revenue growth critical to funding our local services, but it's not going to be the end-all answer. Budget allocations may have to be realigned in order to increase officer strength and to fund our body-worn cameras. So now additional challenges that we face for 2020. And for those of you that have been studying our budget document, you may have seen this sentence in there in our transmittal letter. The primary challenge facing the city of Little Rock remains providing a full complement of services that satisfy the needs of citizens, balanced with the resources available to the city in an efficient, cost-effective, and transparent manner. The city does enjoy a AA Standard & Poor's bond rating and an AA1 rating by Moody's. These indicate that our bonds are of very high quality and that we have a strong capacity to pay principal and interest. Maintaining this debt rating with adequate cash and adequate unrestricted fund balance is critical to obtaining the best value for citizens and taxpayers when investing in capital improvements and infrastructure. when our fund balance and our cash begin to decrease, that can have an impact on our bond rating. As we look at the next slide, the first payment on the 2019 short-term note will add a little over $1 million to the budget in 2020. We've also been told, we know our contract with the Pulaski County Jail expires in 2019. The county has indicated that the current cost could double, which would add $2 million to the annual budget. That's not a done deal. I mean, I know that the mayors are still in discussions, but that's where the current estimate stands. Fire Station 24 will open, and we'll have a full year of operating expenses there. The firefighters are already in the 2019 recruit class. The second phase of the police and fire mobile radio replacement plan and fire turnout gear would require either an additional note for $1.8 million or other funding. We have a 5-year police vehicle replacement plan that would continue. On the next slide, funding would need to be identified or reallocated for the mayor's Safe City initiatives, including 20 officers in 2020. And then I know that you all receive alerts from the city attorney's office from time to time, and right now we have 2 civil suits where I have been directed to sign affidavits to set aside money for these 2 suits that are on appeal. One is associated with the Alexander Apartments, the fire back at Christmas more than a year ago, and then the other has to do with fine payment, a fine repayment plan on a recurring schedule. But at any rate, we've set aside $918,000 for those 2 cases. If we win the appeal, the money goes back to the general fund. If we don't, then it will have to be dispersed. And right now it's just set aside in a special project, so it has not come out of fund balance. It's just been earmarked, okay? And the city must reduce our expenditures and operate with available ongoing resources. So the next slide shows you where we stand if nothing is done. If there are no changes to our adopted 2019 budget, and we don't do anything that might restore some of the funds that were lost in 2018, then what we're looking at with those 2 combined is a $9.2 million reduction to our fund balance, which is a general fund reduction of 22.7%. So on the next slide, the mayor has taken some steps already. He's requested preparation of an RFQ for an independent performance audit to identify potential savings. He's also directed staff to perform a budget review to identify potential budget reductions and reallocations to the 2019 adopted budget. And he's reviewing the possibility of a pilot program to identify potential expenditure savings. It would be a program where the vendor would be paid based on a percentage of the actual savings achieved during the pilot period. So finally, this kind of summarizes what the mayor said in the beginning. We need to get our fiscal house in order and be good stewards of taxpayer revenue to maintain the trust of our citizens and ensure financial stability for the future. We've been so fortunate. Our taxpayers supported our 1-cent sales tax. They supported the bond improvements for the street and drainage bonds that have been so critical to the maintenance and improvements that we've been able to do over the last 7 years. As the 3/8 cent portion of that tax dedicated to capital projects nears completion in 2021, and as our current infrastructure bonds are retired, we want to be able to demonstrate to this that the city has kept its promises, that we've done what we said we would do, so that we earn their support for any future initiatives for the growth and development of the city. So this is just, again, the purpose of this was to make sure that you were very well aware of where we stand and some of the concerns as we look at our budget that we need to address, separately from additional initiatives that are also on the horizon. And then together, obviously, we work all that out together, how we're going to move forward.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for your time, attention, and detail to this very serious matter for the long-term future of our city. Again, I want to commend you. You have been working a lot of hours lately to get us to this point, to understand our past, where we are today for our present, and where we should head for our future. And again, we echo that we have to get our fiscal house in order for the long-term future of our city while maintaining the community trust, while we're going to continue to be accountable, clear, and transparent on how we move forward. What we've already done by the citizens entrusting us with the 3/8 sales tax, and making certain that we keep our commitments to our priorities. With that being said, when coming into office and working with you and our Mr. Manager, looking at the finances board, I felt needed that we had to act quickly on our finances. While we've managed our funds to make certain that we always remain balanced, anytime that you look at that our fund balance is continuing to dwindle on an effort where we've had declining revenues and stagnant job growth in our city, but our programmatic funding has not matched that, we have to strongly consider to right size our governmental expenditures and realign our resources and rethink what are our true priorities to move towards a long future for our city to maintain community trust. So again, we've taken steps for the department directors to do a budget exercise to figure out what we can cut. In the looming, as you've seen already, we've already lost approximately $9 million, and we cannot continue to maintain that moving forward. And so we plan to bring forth a budget amendment within the next sometime between now and June. And as we bring forth that budget amendment, we will have very strategic conversation, Mr. Manager, myself, and Sarah, our CFO, to figure out what is the best fit for our priorities, what's the best fit for the city and city government on how we move forward. And so what we wanted to do today is try to give you, wanted to keep you updated on what's going on, give you this overview as we begin to make decisions in concert with your consultation. And of course, with your hopeful passage of a budget amendment to make certain that we keep our fiscal house in order. And again, while we've had the ability to balance the budgets with one-time resources, that is not a sustaining factor on how we have a long-term future of our fiscal house from that standpoint. And again, that's the reason why we're here today as we start to plan for our long-term future here in our city. We're going to have to make some tough choices, but that comes with responsibility for the citizenry. That being said, I'm going to start the questions, but I also want to make certain that we all know from whence we've come, where we are today, and how we will move forward together. And again, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mr. Manager, as well. Director Hendricks.
Thank you, Mayor. Sarah, come back. I just want to say to Sarah that the 12 years that I've been here, you have given us good information. At times you have been challenged by some folks who sit up here, but you always come up with a good answer. And what I want to say is that the report that you have given, it's understandable, and I agree with the mayor that some changes will have to be made. Thank you.
Director Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I agree with Director Hendricks. Sarah, you've done a great job, and I know you've put many, many hours into this. I have several questions that I'll just come and see you about that I don't want to get into here, but if I could just ask you a couple of things. And this, I may have overlooked this in the book, so I know that forecasts change depending on economics, and so the forecasts, the projected forecasts for, say, fiscal year 20 is like 81 million for police in the new budget book. Mm-hmm. And in the last year's budget book for police, the forecast was $79 million. And so my question is, how do we change, is changing the forecast just done arbitrarily? Are there economic factors that go into that, or how does that happen?
For the 5-year schedule that you're looking at in the budget document, you know that the board only adopts one
Right.
year at a time.
Right.
So we look at a combination of some historical trends and then some things that we know may be coming up. So if we know we're going to be potentially adding additional officers, or if we knew we were opening a new fire station, we tried to factor those things in. Things that we knew, like on the debt service line, where we knew what our projected debt service was and which notes might be rolling off, which would affect both transfers in from the 3/8 cent fund and debt service expense. Those are factored in. The rest of it is taking kind of an estimate of maybe, 1% growth in non-public safety departments and 2.5 or something in public safety. And that may not be the exact use, but we know that public safety, just because of the pension cost and the step and grade and other factors, grows at a higher rate than the non-uniform departments.
Okay. And I want to make sure I understand the special projects correctly, because there's something that's similar in state government. So say I'm a department head and I have $100,000 that we approved for a special project. I spent $75,000 on that special project. So at the end of the year, and we had approved the 100, so there's 25 we didn't spend. And I'm going to tell you, Sarah, I promise you that, we'll spend it in January or something like that. That's too bad, right?
Well, it depends. And that's why the audit looks at the general fund family. The way we have administratively handled that is if it's in the special projects fund, the special project keeps that $25,000 balance. In some cases, that we will direct that to be closed, and if we close it and transfer it back to the general fund and don't spend it, that's the same as the scenario you describe. But a lot of times that does stay there for additional expenditure, and it definitely has done so historically with the children, youth, and family programs.
Right.
So, it depends. Our policy says that if it's not spent within 18 months, it's supposed to be closed and moved back to the general fund.
Okay.
Where we get into trouble is when we move it back to the general fund and use it for ongoing operating expenses instead of just leaving it in fund balance.
Thank you. And if I could just ask one more quick question, and then I will ask the other ones individually. In the budget book, on page 119, and you may not have the book in front of you, so I apologize.
I have it.
Under the general administrative, it's 27 million, the adopted budget, 27,815,000. And in other parts of the budget book, I could never quite make it add up to that same dollar amount. You don't have to answer this now, but could you give me how that breaks down so I can
And
be
I
happy?
can, and the difference I would imagine is on that 101,002 administrative and general line where it's got the 20,307,000, which is a component. That includes the debt service. It includes other things that we, in other parts of the budget document, separate because it's controlled a little differently.
Okay.
So just to give it more clarity, but I can, that also includes things like the transfers out, the vacancy savings. Those are all things that are budgeted as a part of general administration. Depending on the presentation, they sometimes appear on a different line. So I can explain that to you.
That's one more quick one, I promise. No, okay, I'll wait.
Okay.
Director Wright?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you, Sarah, for a very clarifying report. But Mayor, my question was on the summary on page 22, where it said you were reviewing the possibility of a pilot project to identify potential expenditure savings. Would you explain that?
Yes, the pilot project there is an organization that's been able in some other states and other cities to review our spending expenditures and to identify cost savings. And in the event of identifying those cost savings, they basically are based on contingency as far as payment. So they're not paid anything out front, but they're able to identify cost savings that could be fully implemented for the city. Then that particular vendor will receive a percentage of that cost savings. But the majority of the savings would go towards our budget. So it could be huge when you're making tough choices and sometimes have the ability to save other programmatic cuts as we right-size government.
Okay, now would this analysis of theirs include administrative salaries or just department
No, this has
programs?
been more about programs and vendor relationships, not with people.
Okay,
So that is the pilot project. Now, also, so that's one component that we are looking into and working on as far as that pilot project. Probably more importantly, one of the things that we are working on, RFP right now, is for a performance audit. BKD does our internal audit, and they do a great job. And we know that because we continue to receive general accounting GAAP awards year in and year out, and that's due to the work of our CFO and our city manager and the entire department directors. But that just shares that we are balancing our books and we're using sound fiscal policies to balance our books. However, a performance audit basically is an opportunity to look at the programs that we are administering and whether or not we are getting our return on our investment on those programs. So if we're expending X amount of dollars but not receiving Y amount of results, we may not need to spend X amount of dollars anymore because we're not receiving those results. And so a performance audit will help us guide us, make very strategic and data-driven cuts and or right-sizing our government expenses.
okay.
May I
Yes.
say just one thing? I just want to say one thing because I think our auditors may be watching.
Give the disclaimer.
So when our auditors do audit our financial statements, they're not necessarily saying that we're using the best policies or anything. They're saying that what we are doing accurately reflect, or that our financial statements accurately reflect what we have done in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and if there are any findings or anything like that. They don't make any judgment other than the quality of our internal control. They don't make judgment necessarily about our policy, other than if we were, had significant weaknesses, they would call that to our attention. But they're not talking about how great we manage necessarily. Just want to clarify that.
So, Mayor, what you're proposing, and I do understand both concepts, but will there be any analysis of the salaries that we pay?
Yes. So if you will recall, I guess 30 to 45 days ago, we instituted two different task force. A task force that's one being led by City Director Kathy Webb, which is going to be our compensation task force, with two other civilian compensation experts are going to be looking at how we compensate here in city government to make certain that we're fair and consistent. Because we will, once they get started on their work, they will report back to me on their findings, and we'll report to the entire board and hopefully bring forth some policy changes as it relates to compensation. So that's one task force being led by City Director Kathy Webb that I've appointed City Director, or asked her rather, to lead that task force, and she's graciously said yes. So we do appreciate her for saying yes to work on this task force. Secondly is our task force for leave time, because there's been some perception of some inconsistencies of fairness and consistency with our leave time usage. And so I've asked City Director Jean Fortson, along with two other experts on human resource experts on leave time, to be involved. Those two are Maria Smetley, who's the HR director with the Arkansas Electric Cooperatives, as well as Kay Barnhill, who is the state OPM, Office of Personnel Management director. to kind of have both a private sector and a government sector eyes, along with City Director Gene Fortson's banking and business prowess to figure out what's the best fit for our city and provide those recommendations. So those things are already underway. We plan to have a report here in the next few months on how we kind of lead our city in being fair and consistent with compensation and leave time.
Thank you.
And again, I want to say thank you to City Director Kathy Webb for accepting to help with this task force, as well as City Director Gene Fortson. Director Computers.
Sarah, Sarah, if you go back to the third page, where we did our budget adjustment last year,
Yes, sir.
and we have missed it by $3 million. Is that right?
When we did our budget amendment with the things that we knew at the time, when we brought forward the amendment, we said that that resulted in a net loss of $2.9 million.
But we've missed it, so we're a little bit better than 4.
We're a little worse at a $4 million loss.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Right.
We've missed it by $4 million. So we're now, if you look at 18, we're $4 million in the behind. Is that correct?
The 2000.
Or $7 million.
Well, yeah, it's, if you look at the general fund by itself and don't include general fund special projects, it's the 4.1. But for audit purposes, what the auditors and the bond raters, when it's combined, because it's all under your control, it's the 7 million.
Okay, so, and most of that has come from our reserve funds.
Yes.
Okay, so how much of the reserve funds, if you look at 18, are we down?
We're down, it'll be, we'll go from 40 million to 33 million.
Okay.
Circled in red there.
So if you then look back at 18, and most of the things that happen are going to recur in 19, except for maybe a $500,000 we get from the internet sales tax.
If you go back to that, go back one slide, Scott. Hold on, not there. Go to slide 2. That 1.75 million sick leave incentive that was a big adjustment to 2018, that should not recur at that level in 2019. That should only be about 300,000 in 2019.
That's only one.
That's only
And,
one item.
and basically that's going to hopefully be offset by what?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm,
Here's my
most
point.
things are recurring in that we don't have capital items.
So if you look at 18's budget, how much did we miss it, not on our amended budget, but our adopted budget in 18?
It would be that 4 million. The amended budget, we missed by $1.2 million. The original adopted budget, the change was 4 million, because the original adopted budget was balanced. We're going to have a $4.1 million loss in just the general fund. It's 7 million if you combine them.
Right.
Right.
But so we missed it by $7 million.
Right.
If you look at 19, and you look at our budget now that we've seen what's happened here, how much are we behind now that we're 4 months into this in 19?
Okay. We've only had 1 month of sales tax results, but let me.
I know. Gene and I have said to you for years that every time we put in 1 or 2%, we ought to put in 0% each year, and then we'd be surprised because we get money back. So let's just assume that whatever we put in here, I don't care what you assume, it's going to be, we're going to be up, down, but we're going to rock along at basically 1.5%.
Well, based on our, our original budget called for 1.5% sales tax growth. We had a crazy January, which had very high results. The amount we need to get over the remainder of the year, which we don't have February results yet, but would be 1.1. So-
but let's just assume that we just make the 1% a year.
Right.
How much are we going to be behind in December of this year?
Of this year. That was the slide.
2 million.
10. So if, again, just the general fund by itself, if nobody overspends their budget, we still look to be in line with that. The issue is we're using some one-time funding from special projects, so we think 2.2 million.
Okay, so we're now 7 behind on the first budget. If everything goes okay, we're going to be 2 behind.
Slide 21.
What?
Slide 21.
So if we're behind, now we're $9 million or $10 million in.
9.2 million. It's a 22.7% reduction to fund balance.
And that's coming so we've taken our $40 million savings, $10 million is supposed to be.
Right. That
So
leaves
we're really down to
$21
$21 million.
Right. Right.
So do you plan to work on the 19 budget to reallocate funds so we bring our fund balance back up? Or are we going to live with a fund balance at the end of 19 of $31 million with the hope of 20 being able not to take out of the fund balance?
And that's a policy decision for the board.
Well, I know, but
but if
y'all have talked about this. I mean,
Right.
and you've got these numbers, but what's your thoughts on this? I mean, here's the elephant in the room. We have lived with reducing things, but we're now down to human capital. And to the euphemism to get our house in order is we're going to let people off. So now I want to ask you the hard question. How many people are we going to let off, and who are we going to let go in this situation? I mean, that's really where that's where we are now.
And I'll answer that question. Again, when I was sworn in and stepped foot and looked at the books and understood that we have been seeing declining revenues with increasing expenses, we knew we needed to get this house in order. And it's going to be tough decisions. I think, Dean, you're right. Now, because, again, I want to applaud the staff has done their best to protect human capital and moving one-time funds over. But we have to, again, begin to worry about our long-term future. And you have to look at your long-term future, as you just stated. Our fund balance now is $33 million. And you take $10 million that's restricted. So now it's $23 million. And we already have lost $9 million in 2018, and then the adopted budget for 2019 was in 2018. That being said, we are cutting it close. And so to make certain that we maintain our city's priorities, and I firmly believe our city's priorities, number one is public safety, infrastructure, quality of life, and youth engagement. And we have to make certain that we are operating and right-size our government to reflect those priorities. We spend a lot of money with organizations around this city, and we can't do that anymore. We cannot be a bank to other organizations, and we got to make those tough decisions. Now, what we've done is the department directors are undergoing a budget exercise. They've already looked at those cuts. And so the manager and I are working together with Sarah to figure out a budget amendment to bring forward to the board for discussion and hopeful amendment. But again, this is what we have to address for a long-term future.
And I don't argue with that. I think it all sounds good what we're saying, but no one ever says the hard part is we don't have anything else to cut. I mean, we can nip a little here and nip a little there. We're talking about human capital. But before you bring something back, if you don't mind, I'd like you to give us options on so we can have our input into it. I mean, this is a great exercise. We have a problem. Our fund balance is down from last year, $6 or $7 million. The question I ask still needs to be answered. Are we planning to pay back the fund balance of 18 on the back of 19's budget?
And the answer to that question is we have not decided that yet. Right now, we have to get our spending under control. So that's number one. Number two, to answer your question as it relates to human capital, I'll be very frank. We have 75% of our general fund budget is personnel. We need to curb it back and right-size government and take steps and phases, and we don't know that journey yet. But a more manageable personnel cost should be around 65%.
Well, and I appreciate you getting all this together because it's good facts. But when we start talking about where we cut, I think that needs to be, here are our suggestions and give me your input if you don't mind. I mean,
Yes, we'll give you an A budget, a B budget, and a C budget.
Well, okay, that's fine. I'd like a list of, if you say Public Works is going to have to take out X number of people, that we have the opportunity of talking about how we think that affects our four principles of the way we do things. Because, you know, the issues you have to come back with, to me, is are you going to replenish what in 18 on the back of 19? 19 is, you say it's $2 million, but I bet it's going to be $6 or $7 million. No offense. But in the end, I bet you I bet it's a mirror of what we have right now. And if it is, how are we going to do that? And I mean, these are huge policy issues that y'all have done a great job of bringing the problem, but if we say as a board, our main priority is getting the fund balance back up to $38 million or $37 million, then that's a whole different thing the way you look at 19's budget and 20's budget and 21's budget than saying we're going to live with $31 million or $33 million. I mean, it's a whole different way of looking at life.
I agree, and I would share with you, Dean, in addition to the human capital of looking at what we're looking at right now to present to you and the entire board, just from a human capital standpoint and right-sizing government, it's going to be some choices for all of us. That's number one. And if we make the decision to focus on replenishing the funds that have been distributed as it relates to our fund balance, it exponentializes more human capital decisions.
That's the reason I asked the question. What's your plan? I mean, this is the first time we've heard anything of this.
Well, this may be the first time that you heard about this today, but we did not get here overnight.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just asking what the principles that y'all are, what principles you're using, you and Bruce and Sarah are looking at on how you're going to giving us options A, B, C, and D, because that's a really big issue. What do? Do you accept 18, move ahead, try to do better than 19, because $2.2 million, if that really works, is a lot less human capital than it is to take $9 million back.
Well, and I don't want to give you the impression that 2.2 million is what we're looking at, because back on slide 11, when I indicated Scott, if you can go to slide 11, the 2.2 million is the anticipated loss in the current year, but when you look at the non-recurring items that are included in the budget, that was closer to 5 million. So the number we need to address, in my mind, is a minimum of 5 million.
Well, I would say $7 million,
well,
and which basically gives you the same budget, the same problem you had in 18, and that's the reason I said
right.
that.
And then we still have issues looking to 2020, budget, because of the new things that are coming on that are not in this 5 million, which we mentioned, the short-term note payment, other additional things. So we are definitely looking at those things.
And let me bring up the other elephant in the room that's not on any of your things is right now, someone needs to start looking at our health insurance, because now you've got an extra probably $2 or $3 million. Hope not, but that's not even on your list of variables to look at, and that is an uncontrollable variable. So I'll be quiet. Thank you.
The reason why health insurance is not on that list at this point in time, because we're under a contractual agreement. And again, so we can't amend that at that point in time. So that's the reason why it's not on there.
I don't mean amending it, but you might as well start, when you look at the next year's budget, it's going to be up. And so when you start putting in short-term interest and all those sort of things, look at that, because that's going to, we come every year to November and it bites us someplace that I look every day, and, we just better be ready to look.
Now, let's make it clear. Everything is on the table to make certain that we're chief stewards of our city's resources. And again, this is our effort to bring to the board what's been done in the past, where we are today, and how we're going to move forward in the future in providing the board solutions to consider while we maintain our commitments, number one, and remain in line with our budget priorities. Director Fortson.
Thank you, Mayor. This may not be totally possible, but as you come forward with the budget recommendations, to the extent you can, it would be very helpful to follow Director Campuris' example. If it involves reducing human capital by X number of people in a function, try to extrapolate and say what functions that will have to be, means will have to be reduced from that department. So like if it's parks, how many people and what can't they do, or public works. That would help, I think, in measuring what we're doing. I'd like to add also my comments, Sarah, to very excellent presentation. You and I have had lots of discussions over the years about the financial situation. I think two or three things. First, I hope our 1.5 estimate comes true on sales tax. I'm normally a very optimistic person, but if you stop and think, we've missed those projections coming along. We've been through a rather booming economy, which may or may not continue, which retail sales could be softer next year. The internet tax might help. But one of our sales tax collection problems, quite frankly, is the fact we've got 100 to 125,000 people every day who come into Little Rock to work. And for many years, they did more shopping here, but the communities where they live now, Benton, Bauxite, Bryant, Conway, have a full range of shopping options, and so much of that shopping is now occurring there, and we don't have any access to that sales tax revenue, and I think that's a fact of life with which we are going to have to live. One other thing, and auditors and accountants and financial people use nicer language, but when you get right down to it, when you spend more money in your operating activities than you take in, what that is called is deficit financing. We haven't used that language because we talked about this fund and that fund, the total of general funds, but bond underwriters and other people recognize as an operating enterprise, if you're taking in X and you're spending X plus, sooner or later that well's going to run dry. And I thought your example of checking and savings accounts was a good one, but to carry that further, if I've got $5,000 in my checking account and $15,000 in my savings that I'm saving to buy a car, and I get in trouble on my checking and I move 5 from my savings to the checking, I still have the same amount of money. But when the day comes to buy that car, I'm going to be short because I'll be 5,000 short. Same is true if we don't replenish those funds that we've taken out of the special funds. We're going to be short for those needs that for which those special funds were set up. So our problem is not just operating. Our problem is also our asset base and what's happened to deplete it. So I applaud you for taking a look at it. I think your description of tough decisions may have been a kind one. I think they're extremely tough decisions. And I think we have a pressure of time because we have responsibility not only to be prudent for what happens during this year, but we've got to look at the mistakes of the past year and how can we readjust some of that to make certain that our credit rating is not in danger by the time we get to the end of 2019.
Thank you so much, Director Richardson. Director Fortson. Director Richardson.
Thank you, sir. I'm not going to say anything that's unique. I think that Dean, Jean, and Kathy have all captured what I hope to say and maybe frame it in a different way. First, I want to thank you and Bruce and Sarah, especially whenever you do presentations up here, you make it as simple enough that I can even understand it. and this is somebody who has trouble balancing my checkbook. But I've heard you say a couple of times, and I think, Mayor, I don't want to speak for Dean, I heard you say a couple of times that some of these decisions are policy decisions, meaning they need to be decided up here. And I think, Mr. Mayor, what Dean is asking for an opportunity for us to have input on the various options that are available. I think that's what I thought Dean said. In order for us to move in a more positive direction. But I do want to say this. I think, Sarah, I thought I heard you say a positive audit doesn't necessarily embrace the right policies. Did I hear you say that? So, Mr. Mayor, and I think it troubles me that we have 75% of our budget going towards personnel. And Mr. Forson, you talked about the 120 to 25,000 people who come into Little Rock and used to shop here, but don't shop here anymore. But I'm more concerned with the number of people who work for the city and don't live in the city. And Mayor, I embrace your notion of your desire to increase our police department. And I think you've had some wonderful, energetic and bright, creative ideas. But the fact that that's going to cost us $1.6 million for just 20, that's just personnel. That's not including cars or uniforms or body cameras. We're just talking about personnel, correct? That's just for 20. And it's an oxymoron for me. My only resistance to that, Mary, is it troubles me that we have problems with trying to get our officers to live in the city. So that takes away a tax base from the city. And hopefully, Bruce, Chief Humphrey's new approach that if you have a take-home car, you're going to have to live in the city will be an incentive for us to get and create opportunities for more officers to want to live here, especially when we're all talking about embracing community-oriented policing, and you have officers that don't want to live in the community that they're policing. I think you're right. Our priorities, we have a set of priorities, but how we address those priorities need to come from up here in a more comprehensive, proactive way. Instead of us playing checkers, we need to play chess. Because whenever we talking about public safety, we're always couched within the narrow confines of more police and more jail space. And we just heard, I think, that our jail costs are going to go up approximately another $2 million as we renegotiate our contract with the county jail, which is going to have an impact on our budget. I just think that the policies, Sarah, the issues and Mayor that you have put before us as a way to address our current dilemma is something we need to take in mind in consideration, that every opportunity we have a chance to weigh in that is given to us, so that it's not something that is going to be totally dependent upon you, Bruce, and Sarah. Because you have a wonderful plan to move our city forward, and I couldn't say it during the campaign, the election season, but now that after the election, I'm glad you won. I'm happy that you are our new mayor, and I think you bring the youthful energy that we need to have on this board, because before you were elected, Mayor, the median age of this board was 68.2. 68.2. The median age of Little Rock is about 34, 35, which puts you within a year or so for the median age of the city. So I'm glad we have you up here. But I think that these personnel costs that we're looking at, and if we're going to have personnel reduction, Dean, I think we need to be a little bit more creative in terms of how we prioritize what are the most important things for us. There's some of us who think it's equally important to have a number of people helping keep our city clean as it is to have a number of people keeping it safe. And what we end up doing with our current policies, we end up subsidizing the public safety of these outlying and sometimes homogenous communities to the detriment of our taxpayers. So, Mayor, I'm supportive of what you're presenting us. The $1.6 million concerns me, especially when these guys don't want to live here in a place where they're policing. And it's hard for me, from a principal standpoint, for me to get them to understand how you're going to embrace community-oriented policing when you don't want to live in the community that you're policing.
No, I totally, first I want to thank you for your comments. First and foremost, everyone, today is my 106th day. And we are sharing with you today that we are behind $9 million before I was even sworn in. So I want to make certain that is very clear.
Absolutely.
And because I do understand governance and policy, I felt the need in working to make certain that, being that I have financial expertise, that we were doing deficit financing for our city budget, and if we did not get our fiscal house in order, we would be bankrupt.
Absolutely.
That being said, on this 106th day, we brought forth this summary to you to let you know where we've been in the past. This has been going on before I was elected. And we have to make certain, again, that we understand our priorities, which is public safety, which is infrastructure, which is quality of life, where we've been spending an excess of dollars in areas in our city for quite some time.
Sure.
And we will have to make some very tough decisions as it relates to people. And I agree with you. We will have to relook at how we do business with our police officers that do not live here. But I will share with this again. I think my friend Gene Forson would tell you, as it relates to sales tax dollars and things of that nature, a big component of economic development is public safety and infrastructure. And we've been experiencing declining sales tax revenues for the last 10 to 12 years. We have to make certain that public safety is a priority. And what we're going to have to do is realign and right-size our government. Now, if the board, again, all I can do as mayor is work with the city manager to propose a budget. We've already had a budget exercise, and we do know, based on the budget exercise, there are going to have to be a number of different employees that may or may not have to be laid off. But that's the decision for the board and myself to make together. That will be presented to everyone. But I want to make certain, again, it's clear that we have to address the spending problem that's been going on for the past 12 years.
Yes, sir, I agree. And I'm not saying that we change our priorities. I think we have the right set of priorities. What I'm saying is we need to be a little bit more creative in terms of how we fulfill those priorities. I think a lot of times, to our detriment, we couch the way we address those in real narrow confines. And I think it's to the detriment of our budget, to our city. And I hope Rachel writes that you faced this challenge when you first took office. I hope my guy from Channel 11 captures this and says it as well. What she's saying, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, 16. Well, that's one of my favorites. I'm sorry. I saw somebody saying 11 over there. Well, 16 and Rachel and any other members of the media here accurately report the dilemmas that you faced when you came in here. But I think that we need to be up here. If we're talking about policy, we need to be a little bit more creative in terms of how we address our issues that we're faced with. And I think sometimes we're very limited in terms of how we address, particularly public safety. I mean, it would cost us less and probably have a greater impact if we hired 20 ex-felons as part of our reentry program. They're the ones who are out there creating a lot of this nonsense that we see having a greater impact, especially when we have right now, Bruce, that a situation that we faced back in the 90s, early 90s, when we have a dangerous combination of people in our community who have a dangerous combination of hopelessness and fearlessness. If I'm not afraid of anything, I don't have any hope for anything, you can put 1,000 police officers out there. It's not going to make a difference. I'm not scared of them. I don't have any hope to lose anything, so put as many as you want out there. And then change how we operate and how we do policing, that some places policing has there'll be some people that's going to be happy that we add more police. And those are parts of our city where the philosophy or the approach is to protect and serve. But those parts of our city where we have patrol and control, they're not going to see any more police. Because they look at them as adversaries. They don't look at them as somebody that'll be supportive of them. And the point that Tom or Bruce, the Director Webb, made about grants, and Sarah, maybe you can answer this, or Bruce, you can answer this. When we get grants for specific projects and we have carryover from those grant funds, do they become city funds, or are they funds dedicated to their project, which allows us an opportunity to do a sole source ordinance to utilize those funds to dovetail that particular project that we wrote the grant for? Uncomfortable silence.
Sarah, do you want to answer that question? I can answer, but if you go ahead and answer it.
honestly, the one project that you're asking about, I really don't have any knowledge about, which is why I have not responded.
We're talking after
But-
this. I don't mean that,
Okay.
but that was just an example. And then the other part, and I'll be quiet, Bruce. I know the half-cent sales tax in '93, we had $3 million allocated for prevention, intervention, and treatment, and that was based on what it would cost for us to hire 135 new police officers at that time. That's 45 officers each year. Now, the only amount from that sales tax, to my knowledge, that we had committed to personnel was the police department. Now it's my understanding, Bruce and Sarah, that we're using Vision Little Rock, Future Little Rock funds, sales tax funds that were voted on to support particular community-based projects. We're using those funds to pay salary in-house, which I'm not sure people voted for. I don't think people thought that's what we were using those funds for. My understanding, we're using some of those funds to pay salary in-house, not those community-based projects dedicated to improving our community, our safety, and the efforts of improving opportunities for young people. And if that's the case, that's somewhat disingenuous in my mind. I hope it's not the case, but I would like to have a report on that, Bruce or Sarah. Excuse me. That's all I have, Mayor. I think that you've done a fantastic job, Bruce and Sarah. As usual, you guys have always continued to do a fantastic job. Rachel, Channel 4, make sure you guys report that 16.
16.
They're both, yeah. They can multitask. Make sure you guys report that the mayor inherited this situation, and he's been as creative and as involved as possible with Bruce and Sarah to help address it and help change it. I think the only thing that I'm hearing, Mayor, is that Director Compuris is wanting you to engage us and involve us a little bit more beyond, I think, Director Forson is part of that group you have put together. So I think, Dean, that's what I thought I heard you say.
Agreed, and the board will heavily be involved in this process, and we will take the suggestions of making certain that there's more than just one option that's provided to the board to consider.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Director Richardson. Director Hines?
Thank you. Just a couple, I'll try to be brief here. One of the metrics that was brought up, and I had the question, I think you answered it, Mayor, was that 75% of our budget was spent on personnel. You said the target was 65%. Where do we come up with that target? Is that what cities are? I mean, I'd like to know. 65. You said 65, so I would
Just general organizationals try to be around 65%. I said that is not our target, but we should be making a way towards moving from 75% personnel costs towards 65%.
And then,
That's just based on experience of being a bank executive.
Sarah, what's our percent of the personnel cost that's dedicated to public safety, police and fire? Do you know that metric?
I can get that for you. I believe it's actually higher in the fire department. Of their total budget, it's in a higher
No,
percentage.
I'm just
than
talking
even the
about total
75.
percent. Like if our personnel cost is 75, where do fire and police
Oh.
fall into that? What percentage of that 75 are those?
And I'll get that. It's obviously the majority, but I'll
And-
get it for you. I don't have that
And
at my fingertips.
Director Richards, I'm glad you brought up, I know I've sat up here many a time since I've been sworn in, and you've always said that more police is never a panacea for our crime problem. I think my biggest concern is, and I'm going to use one of Ken's terms, I'm having a little cognitive dissonance that we're sitting up here talking about having to cut budget, and Mayor, I know that this was a big campaign promise of 100 officers, but we just got fully staffed with our police force at the end of the year, roughly. And I don't know that we've had time to see what that fully staffed police force can get us as far as crime reduction. But when I look at the metric, and Sarah can bear this out, if, the numbers look innocuous, 1.6 million for 20 officers each year, but you have to compound that and add that 20 officers a year at the end of the sixth year, which would be after the ramp up. That's $11 million just on salary. That's at 2% growth, not at 2.5%, which is what we've been. Pardon? No, that's what I'm saying, just salary. That's not including the 15,000 per officer training, for those. So, you know, if we're really serious about this, there can't be any sacrificial lambs or sacred cows. Sacred cows, not sacrificial lambs. And that's my only concern. And Mayor, I understand your commitment to wanting to fulfill some of your campaign promises, but when we look at fiscal responsibility, you know, I think, and I don't know how our new chief, and I don't want to put him on the spot, but it seems to me he's in a tough position. He's coming in, you're telling him you're going to give him 100 officers. I don't know any police chief that would turn that down, but I do know we've had a previous police chief that when he was hired, and it predates our previous one, came in when this board asked him if he needed more officers. He said, let me see what I've got first before we add a bunch of new officers. And he was able to reorganize and build some efficiencies into the police department he's got. And I understand that, but I think the biggest question is, where are we going to get with what we've got? I mean, that's, and I kind of think it's interesting that we're on one hand talking about cutting and then on the same hand talking about spending more. So, and I know some of this stuff was already programmed with body worn cameras, but that's my only thing that we look at here. And when we talk about adding officers, if we're talking about trading officers for regular full-time employees, those officers make a whole lot more than most of our rank and file city employees. So we're talking about probably a 2-to-1 reduction to get the officers we need. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your comments. And again, I just want to reiterate, this is not about a campaign promise. This is about making certain that public safety is a top priority for our city. And as we look at our budget, your budget has to reflect your priorities. And that's up for the board to decide if public safety is a strong enough priority for them. Director Adcock?
Yes, I agree with several comments made. Sarah, would you come up, please? I appreciate all of this. I feel like I haven't seen these 2018 figures before, though, because when we was adopting budgets, it's always this is what we're going to do. I don't think we ever are told of all these deficits and everything. On your page 16, when you list all the things that police officers need, did you add up over the each year how much these 20 officers, you've got all these individual figures, but do you have there in your sheet how much all these figures add up to? Because I want to add something else to this. Every time we hire more officers, you have to have more sergeants, you have to have more lieutenants, then you have to have more captains, you have to have more departments and everything. So I would like to see how many more sergeants and lieutenants and captains we're going to have the first year and for the total of 5 years. Because I think that we're going to find that this is one item that we, with all the figures I hear tonight, we can't afford. Mayor, I'd like for you to go to page 17 of the book. And I feel really left out because I do not see up here it says, this is the chart, the organizational chart of the fund responsibilities, and no place on this sheet do I see city directors. And I feel like you've left us out of this sheet, or someone has, and I want to know where you see the directors, not Sarah, but I want to see where you, Mayor, see the city board coming in on this chart.
Yeah, but that wasn't his, I don't think that was his fault. We were revising the org chart, I think, based on a draft that they had shown us, and that's my fault that we didn't add the board of directors back in. I think Director Webb pointed one other slide over the mayor department where
I think it was page 178.
Yeah. And I apologize.
I'm sorry, you've
We will
got directors
we-
up here that looks through these books and finds
Well,
out what
I'm-
we can complain about.
First of all, I appreciate so much that you look through these books because
Thank
it
you.
takes a lot to put them together and they're important. But
Now,
also,
all
we
these
will get
people
it
out here are
corrected.
going, all these people out here are going to want a copy of the books just to see what these pages say.
Well, and these are on, this document is published on the city's website, and I will ensure that those changes are made to the published.
Okay.
I apologize.
Also, Mayor, this last week, I handed you a piece of paper, and I'm going to hand them to the rest of the board member. In talking with some of the people over at the courts one day, a lady over there, an employee, handed me this. And last year, whenever we looked at the 2019 budget, and we saw the fines was down, I remember asking Mr. Moore, why are our fines going down every year? And I don't remember exactly what the response was, but we knew that we had had some misunderstandings with the judges, and we kind of thought maybe that might have had a reason for our fines going down. But I want each of you to look at this, because I think as you look at this, you will see and have questions about why our fines are down. And this is a total in the 9 years of $9 million that we have lost, $2 million each year, so that's $18 million that we have lost in fines. And I think there's lots of questions as board members that we might have and that we might want to share with the police and with others on why our fines are down. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so much, Director Adcock. Director Wright?
Yes, Mayor. I know you're going to come back to us with some recommendations on what we cut and how we become more fiscally responsible. But I've since I've been on this board, I have been very much concerned that people live outside of the city, but they drive into the city to work. And I know other cities charge people a tax that don't live in the city. And I have one city in particular, Pittsburgh. If you live outside in the suburbs and those out-of-bedroom communities, but you work in the city, you are charged a tax on your paycheck. And I know we have members of the legislature that they're always putting forth bills that impact Little Rock. Why can't this be considered? That we tax people who come into Little Rock to work, but leave and take their money back to their community. Is that something we can explore?
Mr. Carpenter, could you address that question?
The city has the right to impose a local income tax for anybody that works here, but you'd also be taxing the citizens of Little Rock. And so if you tax just those outside of Little Rock, it doesn't help. At one point, we looked at, this was several years ago, so numbers have changed, but at one point we looked at it, and the estimate as to what we could charge, which I think is 1% of net income, is it would bring in around $500,000 a year, but it would cost $300,000 or $400,000 in administrative costs. Right. Now, how that was reached by the finance department.
And this is based on state law?
There is a state statute that allows
Well, could that statute possibly be amended or by our legislators?
Any statute can be amended as to whether this particular legislative makeup would want to increase the tax, I don't know. And as to what this could potentially bring in for the city is something that would need to be looked at.
Well, but that's what I'm asking, that we look at that, because I agree we're going to have to make some tough choices, and Director Hines is correct. The cost for a police officer is 2 to 3 times what it is for our average employees out there like our code officers and people like that. And I don't know if we can lay off enough people to get to where we need to get to.
Thank you, Director Wright. Director Hendricks?
Thank you. You know, my comments are always different from anybody else's, but this is the first time. Again, I've been here 12 years, and to piggyback on what Director Richardson said, and particularly with attempts that have been made to change this system, and being a minority on this commission, it failed. So we're suffering. I've never witnessed a board meeting this long under our ex-former mayor. So I think that you bring goodness to this board, and I hope that all these folk up here will cooperate.
Yes, ma'am. Director Webb?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I won't take that a second, but I think if people haven't looked at it, there's a city fiscal conditions report from NLC, and it details the similar problems that most cities around the country are having. We're not alone. That doesn't make the money change. But states pass laws that impact us, as a couple of other people have said, and cities, because of the way we're sort of boxed in with what we can do financially, not just Little Rock, but most cities rely on sales tax. Like we get, 49% of our general fund or something like that. But it's a good report, and I can send the link to Laura if people want to look at it, because it, I think, gives us a good overview of what other cities are experiencing, and maybe some things that would be helpful to us as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Director Webb. Director Peck?
Thank,
You gotta do it again. Now you're on.
yeah, yes, I am, thank you. So everybody, I've got to get faster on pushing the button. Director Hines addressed the questions about the additional police and maybe perhaps waiting to see, now that we are fully staffed, where that takes us, and the NLC article that Kathy referred to. That's enough. I'm hungry.
Thank you so much. First, again, I want to thank the board for this process. Again, we will continue to keep the board updated on the forthcoming budget amendment. We will make certain that the budget amendment includes at least 3 options on how to right-size city government. We also include the recommendations the board has requested. We want to make certain that the board has all the information privy to them to make an adequate decision on how we move forward in a policy together to right-size our government and make certain that we will be fiscally responsible and chief stewards of our citizens' dollars. And again, we just have to all make certain that we brace ourselves for these very extremely tough decisions that we have on the horizon. With that being said, we will, guess we'll call this hearing to a close. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Budget hearing adjourned.